Hello guys and welcome to this course. My name is Marian Petrov and I'm Grandmaster from Bulgaria. In this course I will show you few of the best games of the Swedish Grandmaster Ulf Andersson, who is one of the best Western players. He was in the 70s, in the 80s, even in the 90s. He was still keeping his good level, and actually he's even playing until nowadays. Occasionally you can see him on some open tournaments across Europe. And I have divided this course in 3 parts. In the first parts I will show you some of his early games from the 70s, then in the second from the 80s, and then from the 90s. What can we say in general about his style? He is quite famous with his style, which is some kind of mixture between very good positional understanding and positional game, and also he is very good in the endgames, which is of course a good combination and good mixture, because you will see later that in his games he is just trying to keep more or less equal position, waiting for his chance to get the game into slightly better endgame, or he was not shy to make some small combinations when possible. And there was one period, I think in the 70s and in the 80s, when he used to make a lot of time the combination involving exchange sacrifice. So quite often in his games he would just, in an equal position, he would just give exchange for a pawn, but in exchange of this sacrifice, he will have a strong bishop or some good outpost for the knight and good pawn structure. This is also very common for his games. Now the first one, which we will start, is from the 1970. In this game, Andersson was playing with black against Jan Smejkal, and it was played in the Czechoslovakia at this time, in Prague, and it was a playoff from the zonal tournament. Now Smejkal is with white, Andersson is with black, and after knight f3, knight f6, c4, the Swedish player goes for d6, which usually is the beginning of the Indian defense. Now, of course, depends what white will do, because white can decide to keep it English or ready. He can play g3 or b3 or d4. He goes d4. And now normally people who play d6 go knight d7, and then they play this opening code Indian defense, e5, e4, which is considered to be slightly passive, and nowadays I don't think that any top players are playing this with black. It is still not too late to switch to King's Indian defense with g6, but normally people who want to play King's Indian, they start with g6 and then they go d6. But Andersson preferred to move the bishop. In this position there are 2 possibilities. Bishop f5 is a possible line, or bishop g4. Bishop g4 was his choice. Now the drawback of this move is that often when you move the bishop from c8, white will have queen b3, which is attacking the pawn on b7. And Smejkal decided to go immediately queen b3, which is not only attacking the pawn on b7, but in some case, I suppose that if black takes with the bishop to f3, white can take with the queen. So in this case, there is no need to double his pawn. Now normally, in such situations, black is not pushing the b pawn, because obviously he intends to take on f3 at some moment, and later, when he gives the light square bishop and he has the pawns on dark squares, this could create a lot of troubles on the light squares. Especially white can play g3, for instance, bishop g2, the bishop will go there, the queen might go to a4, and black usually moves the queen c8, which looks of course slightly passive, but it is a possible idea for black to move the bishop on g4, so later he can play not only e5, like usually he does in the Indian, knight d7, e5, but sometimes he can play e6, bishop e7, c6, and to try to push d5 to set up his pawns on light squares and then to keep the dark square bishop. Now white goes g3, which makes sense now to put more pressure on the diagonal, and black has to develop. Ideally, he would like to move the bishop to h3 now or maybe on the next move in order to exchange the bishop on the big diagonal. But the problem is that when you go to h3 and white takes and you take with the queen, then the b7 is hanging. So basically there is no time, someone has to defend the pawn. Black moves knight d7, bishop g2, and now, of course, the main idea seems that is for black to push e5, but maybe he is a little bit afraid that there could be some kind of pressure against b7, although I don't know now if it's possible for white to sacrifice the knight. Maybe now to take on b7, but I think this should be good for black, because now he can play simply the queen to d8, for example, and then if white takes, black will have two pieces for a rook and this very good diagonal for his queen. So I think overall this was possible move, but first he plays c6, which shows again what is actually his style. Sometimes he prefers to play ultra solid move, even if there is not a real risk, but he simply doesn't want to give any chances that his opponent can make some combinations. Now white goes h3. And this gives now black a choice between moving the bishop to h5 and then even to g6, or to take the knight. Andersson takes the knight, and we will find out also in the next games that at this maybe moment, at this time around the 70s, he actually preferred in many occasions to have the knight and not the bishops. Bishop f3. Now he goes for e5. And now the plan of black is to play bishop e7, castle, and then depending of course what white will do, because white can take the pawn, he can play e3, he can play d5, but definitely black will move the bishop to e7 and he will castle. And I suppose after this he can move queen c7, rook e8, sometimes bishop f8 as well, and he can speculate that he will play e4, or maybe not, so white can play e4 then. Now Smejkal decided not to move the pawn, and he goes directly bishop to e3, which is an interesting approach. I guess most people would do something with the pawn, either e3, either maybe, I don't know, to play d5. Now black is following his plan, bishop e7, knight c3, and castle. And I think now probably white should have made castle. I think this is the best move, but I was wondering why not this move, but I think the reason is that after pawn takes, bishop takes, now black has few moves with the knight. Normally, knight e5 looks a very good move, but the problem is that after bishop g2, now white will prepare rook d1 and then e4, f4, the knight has to move. So black will have a very passive position, the pawn on d6 could be a little bit weak, the knights don't have any outposts. So I think maybe black could try here the move knight to c5, because now he's attacking the queen, defending the pawn, and he's attacking on h3. And this is more or less forcing white to take the knight. Otherwise, if you don't take the knight, you have to move the queen anywhere. And black simply takes on h3, then knight g4 is coming. And if he takes, yes, of course, now black has double pawns. And it looks like white has a free pass pawn.